At dawn, the horizon was pale and cold, and small groups of hunter-gatherers rose with empty stomachs. The night had been harsh, fire offering little warmth against the biting wind. Each morning began with a question that could not be answered. Would there be enough food to survive the day? Men prepared to track game that might never appear, while women and children searched for roots, berries, or nuts in landscapes that often gave nothing back. Families wandered endlessly, carrying their homes on their backs, knowing that hunger and predators followed close behind. Life was fragile, dictated by weather and luck. One failed hunt, one sudden storm, and survival itself slipped through their fingers like sand. Stone struck against stone, and from the spark of that impact came the first tools sharper than bone blades that could skin hides, cut meat, and carve wood. Fire followed, a force wrestled from nature itself, bringing light to dark nights and pushing predators back into the shadows. Around cave walls, painted figures told stories of hunts and spirits, preserving memory long after voice fell silent. These breakthroughs spoke of a species that refused to yield, clever and adaptable in a hostile world. Yet even with tools, fire, and art, survival still belonged to the weather, the seasons, and the land. Each discovery brought hope, but never certainty. Amid the endless wandering, small changes began to leave their mark. A handful of seeds, dropped near an old camp, sprouted into green shoots when the tribe returned months later. Herds that once vanished over the horizon began to circle back to the same valleys year after year. Berries clustered near the ashes of abandoned fire pits, as though the land itself remembered human presence. These moments were subtle, often overlooked, yet they hinted at something new. Patterns were forming, repeating, waiting to be recognized. No one called it farming, not yet, but the soil was already whispering possibilities, offering a glimpse of a future where survival might not be left entirely to chance. The struggle continued, each day a test of endurance. Families still wandered through forests and plains, chasing herds and gathering what the land provided, never certain where tomorrow's meal would come from. Hunger and danger lingered like constant shadows. Yet beneath this harsh rhythm, quiet possibilities had begun to stir. Seeds sprouting near old camps, herds returning to familiar valleys, fruits growing where fire once burned each hinted at something extraordinary. Humanity did not yet see it, but the choice between endless wandering and control over food was drawing closer. The world was shifting, and with it, the fate of our species. A revolution was waiting, just beyond the horizon. A woman kneels by the fading embers of a fire, emptying a pouch of seeds she no longer needs. They scatter into the earth, forgotten. Weeks later, green shoots push through the soil, small but undeniable. What might have seemed like chance carried a quiet revelation. Across many camps, similar accidents unfolded. Seeds dropped, sprouts rising, food growing where none had been before. People began to notice the pattern. They watched how rain and sunlight shaped life, how the earth could give back when given something to hold. These were not farms yet, just scattered patches of promise. But in those tender sprouts lay the beginning of control. The first step from simply surviving to shaping the future. In scattered corners of the world. people began listening to the land. Along the Fertile Crescent, hands pressed wheat and barley into rich soil. In the valleys of East Asia, rice thrived in paddies carved from wetlands. Across the Americas, maize and beans rose from earth that had once seemed barren. None of this came quickly. It was a rhythm of failure and patience, families learning which seeds sprouted strongest, which patches of ground could be trusted year after year. The wisdom grew slowly, passed from parent to child, season to season. To save seeds from one harvest for the next was a small act, yet it reshaped the future. Humanity had begun to write its destiny in the soil. The wilderness was never empty. It pulsed with predators, prey, and danger at every turn. Yet some creatures drew closer. The first were dogs, once wolves that circled the fire's glow, now guardians of camps and partners in the hunt. Soon goats and sheep followed, their milk, wool, and meat transforming daily survival. Cattle brought something greater, strength to carry burdens and pull the first wooden plows. Across stubborn soil, families no longer roamed only for the hunt. They built fences, not just for crops, but for herds. What was once wild became woven into human life. In return for protection, animals gave stability. This quiet partnership marked the beginning of domestication, a pact that forever bound human destiny with theirs. Rivers became the lifelines of a changing world. Along the Tigris, the Euphrates, and the Nile, fertile soil offered something hunter-gatherers had never known: predictability. Crops grew stronger near the water, and harvests promised food beyond a single season. Families began circling back, drawn to the same patches of land year after year. The rhythm of endless wandering softened. Camps stretched into villages, and for the first time, stability began to root itself in human life. The choice was no longer hidden in the shadows of chance. Humanity stood at a crossroads to keep moving endlessly, chasing gain and seasons, or to anchor themselves in the soil. Farming meant toil, but it also promised security, food for winters, and the chance for generations to grow in one place. By planting roots, they planted their future. The experiment ended. Civilization had quietly begun at Jericho and Catalhune. Something remarkable began to rise from the dust. Clusters of mud brick houses stood shoulder to shoulder, their flat roofs forming pathways where children played. Smoke drifted upward from hearths, carrying the scent of meals meant to be shared. These were not camps for a season, but walls meant to endure. Families began to pass down homes through generations, each room holding stories etched into its clay. Neighbors were no longer temporary allies on a shared hunt, but lifelong companions bound by proximity and trust. Communal storage pits and granaries stood at the heart of these villages, proof that survival now depended on collective effort. For the first time, home meant more than shelter. It became memory, tradition, and belonging woven into the fabric of daily life. Stored grain was more than food. It was freedom. For the first time, families could rely on harvests that stretched beyond their daily needs. With bellies full and storerooms stocked, hands were freed from constant labor in the fields. Some turned to shaping flint and obsidian into tools sharper than ever before. Others spun fibers into cloth or molded clay into vessels that carried water, and preserved grain. Surplus created the possibility of trade, linking villages through exchanges of goods and ideas. A quiet economy took root, weaving people into a network larger than their own homes. Children began to inherit not only survival skills, but crafts, trades, and ambitions. Human identity was shifting, stretching beyond survival into the beginnings of society's true diversity. Surplus brought not only comfort, but conflict. With stored harvests came the question of control. Who held the keys to the granaries? Who claimed the best fields? Power began to settle in the hands of a few, and with it, the first shadows of inequality stretched across village life. To protect what was gathered, walls of stone and earth rose, encircling homes and fields. These barriers were more than defense. They were symbols of unity, a collective shield against raiders and rival groups. Yet behind those same walls, tension simmered. Authority shifted, hierarchies formed, and community bonds were tested. What had begun as survival together was now reshaped by power, laying the foundations of both protection and division within human society as villages grew. So too did the need for meaning in their new way of life. Small shrines appeared, decorated with figurines and symbols of fertility, each tied to the earth that now sustained them. No longer were prayers whispered only for the chase of the hunt. Now they rose with the hope of rains, healthy crops, and abundant harvests. Seasonal rituals drew entire communities together, binding neighbors in shared faith and tradition. Religion settled into the soil, becoming both anchor and compass for humanity's rooted existence. Villages offered humanity both refuge and challenge. Within their walls, families found safety, steady harvests, and the chance to create pottery, weaving and rituals binding people together. Yet security carried hidden costs. Crowded homes turned sickness into a swift enemy, and disputes over land or food sparked bitter conflicts. The promise of stability demanded compromise. In these first villages, humanity stood between worlds no longer fragile wanderers. Not yet civilizations learning that permanence brought both gifts and burdens, and survival meant balancing promise against peril. A craftsman sits by the fire, striking obsidian until it splinters into a sharp blade, each strike echoing humanity's shift toward invention. Farming has loosened the grip of hunger, giving people something precious: time. With it, stone is polished into axes strong enough to fell trees for larger homes. Clay is shaped into vessels to guard water and grain through lean months. Fibers are spun into textiles, wrapping families against the cold. These tools extend beyond survival. They promise comfort, stability, and permanence. Every invention is both a solution and a symbol, proof that human hands can shape more than the present moment. Innovation becomes its own kind of power, guiding humanity toward Earth. Paths worn into the earth carry more than footsteps. They carry the beginnings of connection. From Anatolia comes the black sheen of obsidian, prized for its cutting edge. From the Mediterranean, shells gleam like fragments of the sea. Colorful beads, carved and polished, pass from hand to hand, treasured as much as any harvest. In return, villages offer grain, pottery, and textiles, weaving necessity with beauty. Trade is more than barter, it is the first bridge between strangers. Along with goods come songs, customs, and stories carried across valleys and rivers. A village, once alone, now belongs to something greater. Each exchange widens the horizon, knitting together distant lives into the first threads of a shared human world. A new chapter unfolds as creativity leaves the shadows of caves and enters the heart of daily life. Clay figurines shaped by steady hands carry the promise of fertility, symbols of hope for families and harvests. Pottery, once plain, now blooms with painted pattern spirals, lines, and colors that speak where words cannot. Walls inside homes bear decorations, turning shelters into stories. Music rises, simple instruments echoing with rhythm, guiding rituals that bind villagers in shared breath and movement. What begins as craft becomes culture, a language beyond survival. Every brushstroke, every carving, every song transforms ordinary moments into meaning. Humanity discovers expression, shaping not just tools, but imagination itself, weaving art into the rhythm of life. As trade weaves connections, and tools and art transform life, another force takes root: memory. Rituals echo from one generation to the next, carrying lessons, beliefs, and hope. Communities no longer see themselves as scattered families, but as guardians of something larger, a shared heritage. Objects, songs, and ceremonies become vessels of remembrance, binding the living to those before them. The Neolithic world begins to hold stories strong enough to outlast time. From scattered seeds and tamed herds, humanity has built more than survival. It has built foundations. Stone tools, trade routes, and painted vessels now stand as quiet markers of progress. Villages hum with ritual and memory, threads of culture binding people together. In these first settlements lie the outlines of future cities and empires. The Neolithic Revolution has opened the path, and imagination will carry humanity further than ever before. Across the plains, clusters of mud brick homes rise beside fields of ripening grain. Smoke drifts upward as livestock pace within enclosures, and the rhythms of farming pulse through every corner of life. With steady harvests, populations swell, and what were once small kin groups expand into thriving villages. These communities no longer exist as temporary camps, but as structured societies with rules, duties, and shared labor. Paths are laid, storage pits dug, and decisions made for futures not yet seen. For the first time, human beings are bound together by more than blood. They are bound by planning, cooperation, and trust. Here, in these humble settlements, the blueprint of civilization quietly takes shape. Beneath the sunlit skies, rivers carve lifelines across the earth. Along the Nile, the Indus, and the Yellow River, fertile floodplains draw settlers who turn small villages into sprawling communities. Water, once a gift of chance rains, is now guided through canals and ditches, feeding fields that stretch toward the horizon. Granaries rise to hold the surplus, and markets echo with the hum of exchange. With every harvest secured and every trade route opened, people step further from the uncertainty of survival. These settlements grow into city-states, each pulsing with leadership, ambition, and identity. Here, beside the rivers, humanity makes its boldest leap yet, bending the rhythms of nature to shape the earliest outlines of empire. Progress reshapes the land, but every step forward carries a cost. Forests fall to make room for fields, and soil weakens under the strain of constant harvests. The bounty of surplus, once a blessing, divides communities. Rulers, priests, and farmers no longer share equally in its reward. Crowded homes and streets spread sickness, while rival groups clash over fertile ground and flowing water. For the first time, humanity learns that growth brings both power and peril. Yet the choice is made to endure these challenges rather than return to the wandering past. Settlement binds them, and progress, once chosen, becomes a path that cannot be reversed. From the seeds of farming, the first pillars of civilization rise. Clay tablets bear the earliest marks of writing, tallying harvests and trade. Leaders marshal labor, raising walls, canals, and temples that outlast their builders. Priests refine seasonal rites into faiths that guide entire communities. These forces, record, rule, and ritual, bind people together with shared purpose. What began in humble villages now lays the bedrock for cities, kingdoms, and empires. Humanity's future rests upon these foundations. From scattered bands around flickering fires to cities of stone and steel, the path begins with a seed pressed into soil. Every marketplace, every skyscraper, every temple carries echoes of that first choice: to stay, to grow, to build. The Neolithic Revolution was not just a shift in survival, but the dawn of destiny. Once humanity planted roots, life could never return to the wandering silence of the past.